Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1984 action drama Red Dawn. It's directed by John Milius, who, in my opinion, is a really talented and tremendous filmmaker. Prior to this, he did classics like Conan the Barbarian, and he's really well known for effectively conveying a massively sized epic in terms of the size and scope. He did that with Conan, and he does it again here with Red Dawn. I think John Milius was like the perfect director for Red Dawn because Red Dawn really needed that larger than life, big, bombastic, blockbuster feel to it. It needed that to make it feel like it's this legitimately big, important, big deal kind of movie. And John Milius is the guy for that. And he just does such a great job in terms of handling the various different aspects of the film when it comes to its visuals. Whether it's the action sequences, which are quite abundant in this movie, and making them as visceral as possible and as exciting as possible for the PG-13 rating, and also having sequences showcase an underlying sense of tension or suspense or horror. Like the opening invasion sequence is honestly pretty scary. And the way that it's shot is a big reason why. And he's also a good director when it comes to the smaller moments, the moments that deal with like a very effective and somewhat creepy stillness, like a calm before the storm, or moments involving different characters conveying certain moments of depth to one another, or just intense emotions that arise from the characters when it comes to their reactions to what they're seeing and what they are now a part of and what they're forced to do in order to survive. And he's just a really great director. Like the way that he was able to showcase the landscape and the setting and the establishing shots are gorgeous in this film. That really do a great job establishing the atmosphere of a given scene, and did a great job working with this cast and getting some really strong, consistent performances out of them, and just keeping everything all together as a whole when it comes to the production, despite a very difficult shoot. There were large chunks of the production of Red Dawn that were shot in below freezing temperatures, as cold as minus 30. So, when you throw that in there, there's an opportunity if you had a lesser director, if you had a director who wasn't as good as Miles, that could lose control of the ship a little bit. And you could tell because you could see the certain scenes that were shot in freezing temperatures and they just aren't really as polished as the other sequences when things were a little bit more relaxed or calm when it comes to the weather. But that's not really what happens here. Like Miles is very composed throughout the entire film. There really isn't any moments directing wise where I honestly think he did anything that was jarring or out of place. Like everything just seemed like it was just fitting so well when it comes to the tone of a scene or what that sequence was supposed to convey, or the reaction it's supposed to get from the audience. And John Milius also co-wrote the script along with Kevin Reynolds, based on a story by Kevin Reynolds. And this screenplay, for the most part, I think it's really solid. I think it's a really good script, but I think it lacks polish in some areas. I think there are some aspects of it that I feel should have been honed more, or should have been expanded upon more, or certain things could have been approached differently to really make this script into something one of a kind and really special. But as it is, it's still a solid screenplay, and it really comes down to the concept, the idea of a small town in America. In this film's context, it's a small town in Colorado, Calumet, Colorado. Initially, they were actually going to try to shoot in a real town in Michigan, but then it proved to be too difficult shooting wise in terms of the things they wanted to do. So they decided to change it to some fictional town in Colorado because they shot the film in Colorado. And so you have this small town, and in a lot of ways, it kind of represents a Norman Rockwell esque view of small town Americana. And to then have that whole fantasy, that idealized vision of American culture and life at the time, be invaded by the Russians and the Cubans is a pretty harrowing and intense visual. And the way that the script handles the initial invasion is incredible. It's very tense. It's genuinely horrifying, despite the PG-13 rating. Uh, I do admit though, even though it's a film that gets away with a lot when it comes to its PG-13 rating, because it's one of the first films. In fact, I think it was the first film to be released in theaters to get the rating. So it's in the early days of the rating, so it's able to get away with a lot of stuff in terms of blood and other intense elements, but it's still very much held back in certain areas. And honestly, with a film like this, I feel a hard R really would have benefited it in terms of really making the violence and the war sequences and the battles and the moments when Americans are getting gunned down by the Russians and the Cubans into something really powerful and something that sticks with you for a long time, instead of something that, like, definitely leaves an impact, but it's a little more fleeting. And Miles is he's a guy who would just be absolutely I don't know if merciless is the right word, but he would not hold back on the intensity. And I feel it could have been something like really gut wrenching. And I feel it would have made the film like even better. But as it is, it still grabs you by the throat with the opening. It just looks like it's a typical high school coming of age movie. With two brothers and other people who are going to the school, and you got the teacher, and then the invasion happens, and the teacher gets gunned down, and now all hell is breaking loose. And I like that it doesn't do what other scripts might do, where it takes too long to really get to that point. It throws you in like almost immediately. So it's not one of those things where, oh, we're going to spend like 20 to 30 minutes of the runtime just letting you get to know these characters before the first invasion. I like the fact that no, you don't get any of that, other than like base stuff in terms of the names of certain characters, or when it comes to the two brothers, the fact that they're related to one another. But other than that, you don't really get anything. And it really does a good job putting you right in the middle of the chaos. And what makes that work is because of the fact that you still get characterization and extra bits of depth for these characters, but you get it like later. You get it throughout the movie while the survivors, of the high school, the last remaining Wolverines, they are hiding out in the mountains, and you get more character moments and more depth from these characters when they're conversing with one another, or sharing a deep emotions because they found out that their parents are dead, stuff like that. So I feel that that was a good choice when it comes to structuring the script when it comes to the characters. Now, one of the biggest strengths of the film is its characters, at least when it comes to like the main cast, the Wolverines, Jed, Robert, Matt, Erica, Tony, even Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Tanner. Like, all of those characters are really strong. They're written very well. There's a lot for the actors to work with when it comes to their roles, and I like that there's a lot of elements within this portion of the film that is very much something akin to a coming of age movie from the 80s. Maybe something you might see starring uh, the Brat Pack. Like the Brat Pack, or some members of the Brat Pack, might be a part of it, part of this war. And it just adds a different sort of unique uh, um, feel and overall vibe to everything, because you have this whole coming of age teen drama mixed with a war movie. And there are other Wolverines like Danny and Aardvark and Daryl, but to be perfectly honest, they don't. There's not really a lot in the script to really flesh those characters out or really make them feel as real and as personable and as full of vitality and life as the main crew. And you also have other characters like Mr. and Mrs. Mason, who are there to, help and assist the Wolverines, with food and shelter when they need it at certain times. They're also the ones that were holding away Tony and Erica and keeping them safe so that they can go with the Wolverines. Um, you also have Tom Eckert, who is Jed and Matt's father. And when it comes to the villains, this is honestly where the script is lacking in a pretty significant way to me personally. For something that is as harrowing and as genuinely intense as a invasion on American soil by the combined forces of Russia and Cuba, I feel the lack of a genuinely charismatic and memorable and strong antagonist really dampens the overall impact of this whole aspect of the movie. It makes the forces just not really as imposing, especially after the opening scene. The opening scene is great, but then after that, when you get a little bit more about the opposing forces, you see who they are, you see some semblance of what their plan is. It just never really coalesces that well. And there are certain characters that are interesting, like for instance the Colonel Ernesto Bella, who's the leader of the Cuban Revolutionary Army. There's an interesting arc with his character where he gradually throughout the film starts to become more and more disillusioned with what he's doing, and because of the fact that he used to be a member of a resistance army just like the Wolverines back in Cuba. And so he sees firsthand the atrocities and just the sheer amount of violence and death that's happening under his watch, and it affects him, and he ultimately he quits. He decides he's going to go back to Cuba at at some point in the story near the end of the film, and he actually lets Jed and Matt go. So that is interesting, but that's the only thing that makes that character stand out. When it comes to his other fellow supporting officers or superiors, there's not really much to them at all. There's not much depth. There's not much intrigue. And as a result, the whole opposing force that the Wolverines are fighting is kind of boring. And despite the fact that there's all this action and there's all these bodies getting gunned down by the Wolverines, after you get past like the first two initial battle sequences, you don't really feel as much because you don't really have the same amount of animosity towards this opposing force as you do with other villains and other opposing armies and other movies of this nature. So I feel that that was definitely something that I feel really needed to be handled differently. Like William Smith is a very talented actor. Make that character a significant force early on in the script, and make him like the main bad guy, Colonel Strelnikov, the Spetsnaz. Like don't have him brought in like halfway through the movie. Like he doesn't even need to be Spetsnaz. Just have him be like the leader of the Russian forces. And you have the Cuban guy who doesn't want to get involved in too much conflict. He doesn't want to hurt people. But you have this guy who's just unhinged and crazy. And you could have moments where during the whole sequences where they're trying to re-educate Americans, he'll be like holding up the American flag, and he'll be talking to the Americans, and he'll be like, you think this is important? This is important to you? This is nothing. This is nothing to me. And then he burns it like right in front of everybody. Like, and then that would like elicit reaction, and he'd be like, fuck that guy. He burned the American flag in front of these red-blooded Americans. And then you could just sprinkle in more moments with this character where he's like, maybe he's torturing somebody, or he's just he's the one that decides to shoot all the people that were singing that song, which it's not the anthem, it's the other one. I know I should know, but America the Beautiful. So he's the one that is like, I'm gonna kill all of them. Give me the gun, and then he just shoots them all. Like, if you had something like that, then you'd be like, okay, like now I want him. I want him and the entire army to go down hard. Yeah, but you don't really get that. So there really isn't that kind of connection with these villains and with this opposing force and this opposing army. And it also doesn't help either that the Wolverines, they tend to like just overwhelm them and take out these soldiers like way too easily for a group of kids. So that makes them come across as kind of weak. So I feel that there just needed to be some more polish when it comes to that aspect of the script. There's also a few other little things that I think that they could have done a little bit differently that I would have liked to have seen. For instance, there's a whole moment later on in the movie after the combined forces of the Russians and the Cubans decided to finally wise up and use their brains and set something up where they could track where the Wolverines are hiding. And now their cover's blown, and they're going out on their own again. And that's where they find out that one of their own was effectively tortured and forced to swallow this thing that enabled them to track his location. And there's this a very emotional sequence where he, along with this other surviving Russian guy, they are tied up, and Jed is thinking about shooting both of them, but he only follows through with shooting the Russian, and he decides to let one of his own go. But then that character gets shot by C. Thomas Howell's character, and I was like, I think it would have been really interesting if that didn't happen. Just let him go. You have an emotional scene where Jed, he's not able to do it, and he's like, just go. Just get out of here. Just go as far as you can in the opposite direction away from us. Because then you could set something up where that character could be involved in the finale, where instead of it just being Jed and Matt, just on their own against this army, he could be involved in that climactic action sequence. He shows up and he's able to have a moment where he redeems himself because he teams up with them before they decide to take the compound, so to speak. And he sets up the diversion that enables Matt and Jed to have an initial advantage. Maybe he sacrifices himself. So that character then has some redemptive arc. Instead of him just getting shot, never having any opportunity to redeem himself. I understand what they were trying to do there, trying to show that C. Thomas Howell's character is completely far gone, but I think you already were getting the gist of that anyway, and I think you could have done that differently. You could have had a moment where he just relishes too much in killing one of the Russian soldiers, and then you realize, okay, he's completely lost it at this point. Speaking of C. Thomas Howell's character, that's another thing that I would have liked to have seen done a little differently when it comes to Robert and his war with the helicopters. I don't mind him dying in a blaze of gunfire from the helicopter. I think that's fine. But can he at least take one of the helicopters down? Like, just for the sake of adding a little bit more punch and a little bit more action to that sequence and making it more of a crowd pleaser. So, and also really, if you have him shoot one of them down, then when he ultimately does get shot and killed, it's more of a shock because you think, oh, he's got this, but then he gets shot and killed, and then the reality sets in that he doesn't. He just got lucky, and he's a kid. If he's going up against these attack helicopters, he's not going to be able to take them all out. He's not Rambo with a C4 tipped explosive arrow. He does that. That's not who this kid is. So I would have liked something like that. That would have been nice. And also, I really feel that they should have established the character of Danny better. Like, Danny is the one that ultimately goes with Leia Thompson's character, Erica, and they're the two remaining survivors out of the group of Wolverines. And I just feel like that character was so much of a nothing character for the most part that I really feel that somebody else should have been in that position, a character that had more screen time, or they should have done something in terms of the script to really flesh that character out more. Because it just seemed like, really? Like, Danny's going? Like, Danny's going to be one of the survivors? Like, maybe it's because it's one of those things where it's unexpected, but it just didn't really fit to me. Also, because I'm a big fan of Powers Booth's character in this, I would have liked him to have survived too at the end, but I understand what they were going for. And ultimately I'm willing to deal with his character's death. And that's really honestly the only issues that I do have with the script is those things that I mentioned. There were some other things that were actually cut out of the script that I'm really glad that they wound up, excuse me, on the cutting room floor, because having a romance between Erica and Andrew, that that doesn't that doesn't work. Like, I don't like that at all. The age difference alone makes it awkward. Really glad that they cut that out. I think there was also something involving Tony and Jed, and they were romantically involved at one point, but then they decided to drop that angle as well. And I think that was for the best. Um, so there were extra things that were a part of the script that were ultimately cut out. So there were adjustments that could have been made, uh, um, and ultimately for the better. But it is what it is. But it's still a good script, despite the fact that I think it's just missing a few pieces, because there are so many good things about this screenplay. Like, I just really like how there are a multitude of moments in this movie where it effectively conveys the severity of the conflict and the war by not showing you anything. It's just the words from Andrew detailing what happened when it comes to all the nukes that were dropped. And there's other moments too where you just get a sense of the horror of this war by showing the way that people are emotionally reacting to it, but also by just having people talk about it. Instead of necessarily showing you what happens, they talk about it. Or it leaves it up to interpretation or to your imagination what might have happened or what might have occurred or what happened next. And honestly, I like that. It's a different approach that I think definitely works for this film. And it's a movie too that, even though there was this ending that was set up with the narration that explains that the US won the war, that was not initially in the original script, it's still got this somber overall feel to it. Like, it doesn't really come across like a jingoistic, hoorah, America, fuck yeah kind of movie, despite what some critics might say about the film nowadays. It really doesn't come across that way. It comes across more as a film that cautionary tale, and it comes across as more of an anti-war film than anything. So I think that that's definitely something that makes the script stand out too. Is this anti-war sentiment? The cast, when it comes to the main players. It is phenomenal. It's one of the best casts when it comes to this genre of film, or honestly any film from the 1980s, because you got Patrick Swayze as Jed, you got C. Thomas Howell as Robert, you got Leah Thompson as Erica, you got Charlie Sheen in his film debut as Matt, you've got Jennifer Grey, excuse me, as Tony, you got Powers Boothe as Colonel Andrew Tanner playing a good guy, which is really refreshing and cool to see Powers Boothe playing a character that isn't just another villain. So it's nice to see him play against type in that regard. You have Ben Johnson, who plays Jack Mason, Harry Dean Stanton, who plays Tom Eckert, Jed and Matt's father. You have Ron O'Neal, who plays Colonel Bella. William Smith, who plays Colonel Strelnikov, Frank McRae as the teacher, Mr. Teasdale of the high school, Lane Smith, who plays the smarmy Mayor Bates, who's just willing to do anything to save his own ass when it comes to selling himself to the Russian and Cuban forces and doing their bidding. And you also have some other actors who play lesser roles in the film that have less screen time, like Brad Savage as Danny, Darren Dalton as Daryl, Doug Toby as Aardvark. But when it comes to the main cast, the ones that have the most screen time, they really shine. Like Patrick Swayze, this is honestly one of his best performances. The scene where he's just breaking down emotionally, looking at a photograph of him and his brother when they were kids, is a really poignant and powerful scene. It just showcases how genuinely tremendously talented of an actor Patrick Swayze was. There's no dialogue in that scene. It's all Patrick just emoting and effectively showcasing the breadth of those emotions. And I feel that him and Charlie Sheen, they had really good chemistry. You bought that they were brothers. And Swayze just did a good job playing that stoic leader type, but also a guy who isn't afraid to have moments where he is vulnerable and he does release emotion. He does cry. He has moments where he's not able to be tough. And I like that. I like that Swayze was able to tap into that. And Swayze was always an actor who was always able to tap into that kind of side of a character. He was never afraid to do it. And whenever he did it, he did a great job. And this film was no exception. Like the whole scenes where you can tell that he's distraught and he's emotional because, his dad is dead and he's trying to keep it together, and he's like, turn it into something else. Turn it into something else. This just desperate cry. He's not crying, but he's crying out in a different way. And he's able to convey that with just the tone of his voice when it comes to him just telling all of his friends and all of these kids, turn it into something else. And C. Thomas Howell, he's great. He's really good as Robert because this is a dual role. This is a role where he plays two different sides of this character. So he plays Robert when he's shy and reserved and kind of nerdy. He's wearing a Star Wars hat. Doesn't seem like a guy who wants to be involved in conflict. Doesn't seem like a guy who would ever be considered like a badass or like the toughest guy of any group. But then when he's tested and when he loses his father, something clicks, something snaps inside of him, and he becomes this ruthless killer. And C. Thomas Howell just really did a great job conveying all those different sides of that character. And you have Charlie Sheen in his first ever acting role, kind of a difficult role, and did a really good job with it as Matt. This guy who's he's very immature. He is. He's very immature, awkward in certain social situations, but he loves his brother. And he's trying to do what's best for his brother and what's best for his friends. And he's willing to sacrifice his life for his brother. And that really does shine and really does come through when it comes to his performance. You have Jennifer Grey and Leah Thompson, who do really good work playing their characters, Erica and Tony, two young women who have been through some pretty heavy shit already, especially Erica, who's dealing with some PTSD. Jennifer Grey, her death scene is honestly, you might even argue, like her best acting. The scene where she knows she's dying and she's got the grenade. Like that honestly could very well be her best acting. Because she's very authentic and very strong in that moment. Powers Boothe, loved him in his small role as Andrew Tanner. Made the most out of like 5 to 10 minutes of screen time. Harry Dean Stanton's another instance like that, as Tom, Jed and Matt's dad. Doug Toby, Darren Dalton, and Brad Savage, they're just kind of there for me. Not really that great performance-wise. Ron O'Neal was fine, but he was the only actor who played a villain who actually had anything to work with when it comes to any sort of depth of his character. William Smith, I liked. He was an intimidating presence. Kind of a nothing role. And the less said about Vladek Shaybal as General Bratchenko, the better. Like, that guy was just a wet noodle. Yeah, and Lane Smith was a good, sniveling, just slimy mayor, and Frank McRae did a good job at playing the teacher in the little bit role that he had. The film also features some wonderful cinematography by Rick Waite. It's got some excellent editing by Tom Noble, especially when it comes to the various different action sequences in the movie. And it has a spectacular score by Basil Poledouris. Basil Poledouris, to me, is one of the most underrated, overlooked composers. He rarely ever had a dud when it comes to his work in a film. And Red Dawn is no exception to that rule. Like, this is a great score. From the opening theme to the various other bits of music that are utilized throughout the movie, the different compositions that are there for tension or sequences that are trying to evoke a certain mood or atmosphere when it comes to the different internment camps or the Russian and Cuban forces themselves. And it's a very patriotic sounding score at times, but it's also very sinister and very foreboding, and it just meshes together very well. It's like an hour and 50 something minutes, but I think it's actually pretty well paced. There are a couple moments where it might drag a little, but it picks up pretty quickly, so it doesn't really drag too much overall. While I think that an R rating, more violence, definitely would have really made it even more impactful, as well as some other aspects of the script being changed or different things being added. I still think it's a really good film, and I would definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it already.